Is this recording already?
Yeah, this is how we start every show.
Okay.
We're just
Yeah,
we look at each other and awkwardly smile, and we're like, who's going to say the first thing? Hey, everyone. We have a great show this week with a special guest, Charlene Sayo, who is a podcaster, a writer, blogger. She does the Misrepresent podcast. It's Misrepresent Behind the Face of Fierce Woman. And it's a great podcast that features lively discussions with whip-smart, trailblazing women in the arts, sciences, literature, politics, music, social transformation movements, and more. We have her on the podcast this week. It's a long discussion. No need for long intros. Going to get right into it. It's awesome. Get pumped. Hooray. Let's go.
I am wrong, you are wrong, seriously. They are wrong, we are wrong, seriously.
I made an observation that there's an enormous multitude of critiques of the university system as it currently exists, but they're all in academic journals, and you can only access them if you pay thousands of dollars. But this is also like the primary critique of the system is that there's too much money involved. But accessing that critique costs you thousands of dollars unless you're a student.
There's got to be some books.
Yeah, and even if there are books out there, they cost quite a bit. Like textbooks are very expensive.
I've never bought a textbook.
They're expensive.
I've heard.
Just believe me. they're ridiculous, and you can't even really return them and buy them back. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't do that every semester.
Yeah, don't they like change them a little bit like every year to prevent reselling them and stuff?
Yeah, it's like a new introduction. Like, you have to buy like the 5th edition, even though the 4th edition is pretty much the same like content. When I sold my books once, I think the most I ever like earned back, which was about $90, and I made about $6 off of it when I tried to resell it. So
just because it was out of date now, or
yeah, it was like out of date. They said that they weren't going to be selling it for the next semester, so then you just have to try to find a student who's
just
willing.
Like a textbook collector who's like, oh, I just want to read about this for fun.
Yeah,
I want every edition.
Yeah, or you just have to arrange with another student, put out the call that, hey, I have this textbook, you guys are using it, I'll sell it to you for $5. There you go. But I do agree with you, yes, that accessing this kind of information is quite expensive.
Yeah, I know anytime I want to read academic papers, it's like $40 to download, unless it's on one of those open access journals. But it's just like, okay, I guess I'm not reading that because I was only mildly interested in it anyway. Like, I wanted to skim it, but not for $40. Sorry.
No.
It's like that Aaron Schwartz. Isn't that what he was put in jail for? Was putting academic papers online? Yeah.
He was accessing journals that were on JSTOR, which is an academic like primer to get journals that students and only faculties and professors can access. But I don't understand how that could have been illegal. Like, I don't know, before I went back to school, my friends gave me articles.
Right. Yeah, I think it was framed in the trial as something like unlawful access and damage to computer systems.
Like you hurt the computer's feelings?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I kept thinking. It was like...
Well, I thought it was just a copyright thing. Like, it's like downloading a movie that's illegal. Sometimes they pick someone and are like, you get to go to jail for this, even though everyone does it.
Yeah, I think I recall that he accessed it in a physical location that was unusual too. Like, he went into a space that was for faculty and downloaded all these files like more quickly than he could off of the internet and then leaked them. And that's, I don't know, part of the reasoning they used to bring him to trial was that there was some sort of trespassing involved or something along those lines.
My idea is that all academic journals should band together, put all their stuff online, and if they want, they can charge like $10 a month and you can just access everything. And I would pay for that. And I think a lot of like casually curious citizen journalist people would pay for that as well. And they'd probably make more money than trying to get people to pay $40 for one paper.
Yeah, like a Netflix for all journals.
Netflixitize journal access.
I totally agree with that because really nobody reads their stuff unless they're in school. Or unless they have to. So it's also like if you're trying to be more accessible to the public.
it's like when you write things, you want people to read it, right? Like when I write things, I want people to read it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point.
But I think it goes along with being exclusive to the university and just trying not to, I don't know.
Almost an elitism, I guess,
Well,
of like
yeah.
academia.
Well, I think there's a lot of that already. Well, that is academia. It's really
Right,
this
right,
exclusive
Yeah, every
club.
The departments will each create their own language, so they can't really, you can't talk about that department's issues because you don't know these polysyllabic words that we all memorize as part of our like gated club.
That, and I think it's just like not trying to be as accessible to like the public or the common people. Do you know what I mean? Like education is so exclusive already. So of course that's what they're going to do with their journals, because even those people like who have access to this kind of information are still quite passive. Like I see that, like I go to college and hopefully to university in the next year or so, but for those who do access information, they're not also very critical about the information that they're accessing. So, and I think the ones who can make a good critical analysis of information like that, who will actually use the information and education that they can access to good, aren't necessarily people who are in school.
Yeah, well, people in school are like busy. They have to worry about their marks and stuff.
Well, yeah. Yeah. No,
I mean,
that's true.
I think some people obviously go to school to learn and really want to, but some people are just there because they didn't know what else to do. I think like it's just kind of a default path, and like you want to get a job and you want to have a life and not be on the street. But yeah, there is a difference between going to school and being passionate about learning and information and actually looking critically at the information put in front of you. And I mean, I think kids are just kind of trained to not want to do that right from the start in school. Like their inherent desire for knowledge is not respected and nurtured. So that plays itself out in ripples as we go through the entire schooling system from grade school on.
I totally agree. Just that's something that I see when I do go to school is the lack of real participation. And it's like just a passive atmosphere in classrooms and how people aren't very critical and they don't question things. And it is just creating like this factory line of students who don't really think. And it's true, they are just more concerned about their grades and their marks without really putting into a larger context in terms of their environment and the institutions that aren't also encouraging anyone or even faculty to really be a little bit more radical and to question what's going on in their school system. So
I think just like the way it's presented, I'm assuming, again, I never went to college or university, but I think
you're not missing much, don't worry.
I think that there's a little bit more of a openness to different interpretations of information, but in grade school and like high school, there's the teacher at the front telling you what's true, and isn't really a space for the kids to have their own thoughts and have their own interpretations. Like them participating in the conversation is not really part of the curriculum. Like they just get the download of the information that they have to give back onto the test and win if they push the right answers.
Well, I think that still happens at a college and university level. I think it's really
Yeah.
only maybe in the postgraduate level that you can be a little bit more flexible and start to critically think on your own. But I still see that, especially if you take, for example, an English class that's a survey course. Like if you take a class like American Lit or Canadian Literature, you understand that you have to go into the class and you have to read like 10 novels in like one semester, but you don't go too deep into any of the work and you're just expected to really listen to the professor and like write your essays, and then that's it because you have to move on to the next.
Does the professor have like a predetermined sort of interpretation of the works that you're probably better off? Like they wouldn't say that, but you're better off to agree with them. You'll probably get a better mark.
It depends. Like, yeah, I think that it depends on the professor, but yeah, most of the time there is an attitude already towards the piece, and of course they're the professors with a PhD, so they're the experts on it. And,
right.
And I look around at my classmates, and a lot of them will definitely just listen to the teacher and think like, okay, well, my interpretation is not great, and they will listen. And so, and I do think that any kind of like outside source or information is not really welcomed in classrooms. Like you can't really bring a very strong political social analysis to any kind of literary work.
Okay.
That's always been my struggle. So it's challenging. I think that there are those who get quite radicalized through this process, but then there's many more who just don't even question it.
Kind of like, well, you got to get your marks. Like, this is about getting a career for me, and my mom says I have to.
And I want to be an English professor, and if I want to get tenure, I probably should say the same things that my English professor says. So.
Yeah, there's really no creativity. Like, I think that education should just be creative, period. And I'm not talking like just arts and crafts, but it should be like creative in your thinking and like what you could bring to the table. But obviously, I don't think that institutions are really encouraging that kind of atmosphere.
So I really like those Montessori schools.
Yeah.
Just self-directed learning. Like the teachers are there as facilitators and not like to be the great downloader of information. They're there to be like, hey, what do you want to learn about? And we have resources for you. And hey, maybe this is interesting. Like suggest and direct, but not impose.
I feel like when I was in elementary school, I really gained an anti-authoritarian streak from the downloading paradigm. Like because I can remember specifically with specific teachers being like, I think she's just reading out of the book and she doesn't actually know about this period in Canadian history. She's got the same book I have. And I've got we're both just reading it together. I don't get why she's up there and why like we're not. And just having that opposition to the illegitimate authority.
Yeah,
you just notice that when you're like, oh, the teachers are just actually people. They're not godheads. They're just humans who got a little older than me. And got a job.
No, and I get that because I didn't go to school for several years, and when I did, I was just really bored.
Like it just wasn't challenging enough?
It wasn't challenging. It was, I'd done like a few years I stayed in the Philippines and went and did this integration with the different sectors of Philippine society. Like I slept on cardboard boxes as striking workers. I stayed with women workers. I integrated with like the fisher folk and tried to understand like what was their situation. So, that's learning, right? That's really learning.
Putting yourself in the situation.
Yeah. And then I was involved with like a Filipino-Canadian youth organization that had a very strong activist bent towards it. So going back to school and like sitting down and just being really bored and then being completely in a space that's disconnected from everything, it wasn't for me. So I lasted like 2 semesters and then I couldn't go back until quite recently. And it's still a struggle. Like every day it's like...
It must feel like there's this severe lack of connection. If you've actually went and done all those things, like been there with those people, like you get to know them and you empathize with them and you feel their struggle and you know about it because you were there. And then there's this other side to it where people are just talking about it in a room who have never met them, who don't know what's going on, who like...
It's frustrating because then you see like you get mad at the institutions, like you get mad at the school and then you get mad at your professors because you're like, you don't understand how damaging this is to like not just my classmates, but to like society. So it is frustrating. And just even the amounts of like racism and sexism that's being exhibited in class discussions. And it is frustrating when there's no connection to anything, like with my classmates and then even with my professors who don't seem to understand that like not every student is being supported by their parents. Like I have professors who like
classist assumptions.
I have professors who just assume that all of us are like living at home and that our parents are paying for our education. And there are students who have that privilege and that luxury, but then I know so many others who don't, who are also like single moms just trying to go back to school.
Right.
So, but when I hear it, I'm like, do you not understand who your students are? Like, there's so many students that I know that are just living off a student loan period. And they're like pretty much starving by like the 4th month into the semester, right? So maybe it's like the sociology professors and the anthropology professors. I think that they might have a little bit more of an idea. But some professors...
Makes sense.
Yeah, but the reality is I don't know too many students who have like 100% support from their parents. But then I don't know those people, so...
Right. Yeah, it's weird that there's like this cushion of unreality surrounding... people in academia, like the people who are supposed to be teaching like post-secondary education, like the education where you're going to like really learn something deeply, and there's this bubble surrounding it of just like, I guess, ignorance in like a, not in a pejorative way, just in a not knowing. But you said like racism and sexism in the classroom. Do you have any like examples or things that you've experienced?
Oh, yeah.
that you're comfortable talking about? Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many examples I could think of, but I think just the most recent was really frustrating. So in my English class, at the very beginning of the semester, we were discussing existentialist literature, which can get so exhausting sometimes because, Albert Camus and Sartre and other existentialists were always talking about like the human condition and how everyone's alienated and how everyone is like in this state of despair all the time and how there's no meaning in life. and I think like that is the society that we live in. But then people don't tend to read farther into their works. Like Sartre also said, but hey, instead of just like not having any meaning, we could struggle against that and find meaning. Like, let's struggle. Let's like make something out of our lives. And people don't tend to like read that part. I don't know. It's like, to me, that's
prefer to stick with the down.
Yeah.
Like, oh man.
So I'm just like, okay, we can make a difference. Like, people are making a difference every day. Like, that's why there's revolutions, because we know that there's despair.
That's why history has changed over time. Like,
right? So the topic turned on to ignorance and can we fight ignorance? And are we okay with being ignorant? And the majority of my classmates were like, yeah, I think it's fine. Like, if I know I'm ignorant, I'm like, I'm okay with that. And then I was sitting there going, no, I'm not okay with that. Like, actually, I'm really not okay with that. I was like one of the only few people of color in that class. But I was also the only one that was really trying to like counter that argument. And of course, it was getting really absurd in terms of how do we counter our ignorance? And I think what I came away with that is that people were making fun of the whole idea of being ignorant. And I said, there are people in this world that have died because of ignorance, either
lack of information.
Yeah. So I tried to really start saying like, this is really quite damaging. And everybody just looked at me and was like, but as long as you know you're ignorant, it's like, I think it's okay. And I'm like, no, if you know it, that's even worse, because now you're just committing like the most horrific actions against each other, and that's not acceptable to me.
I think for a lot of people, it comes from this place of unconscious guilt that they're not addressing, that they feel that they're complicit in these systems that they understand logically to be bad. They understand that their cell phone's battery comes from like blood mining operations in Africa.
Conflict minerals.
Exactly. Yeah. So they have these conceptions of these narratives coming into them that like, you're responsible, you're part of this problem, it's your responsibility to like step up and be better. But because it's such a daunting task, they just be like, I know that all this bad stuff is happening, I've got kind of an ironic defense system for it, I really just want to watch Netflix.
So we need to get this information on Netflix.
Basically I think that if we got it on like Netflix or develop some sort of like app or something, because people seem to respond to that. But then you see how it's also not being challenged as well by the professors. I'm like, this is so damaging.
Just the idea of like ignorance and not knowing being spoken fondly of in a university. It's like almost comical just how like backwards that is. It's like, this is an institution of learning and we're here to say that we're proud of being ignorant. And as long as we know we're ignorant, I don't need to learn anything about that.
It's like it's a hilarious, like over the top misinterpretation of like wise people know that they know nothing.
Yeah.
But it's like, but that's supposed to be an incentive to learn, not like you're just like, I'm really wise, I don't know shit, and I don't plan to like change that.
Just one other example of like just even racism. So now we're studying the work of Audre Lorde, a Black lesbian feminist whose works are being read all over the place, and she's heralded as a hero for many women of color, especially in the United States, especially for women of color feminists. So this is something I take quite seriously, but I think that when most people read their works who don't have that same experience, it's not taken seriously. So I had to do another group presentation. And one of the other women, she's white, we were discussing bell hooks and Audre Lorde and Angela Davis, and she really doesn't know very much about their works and couldn't really understand what I was trying to say about theory building and why feminism is very diverse and why women of color organized together and why they were isolated from the white feminist movement for a long time. She had no idea what I was saying, and kept saying, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about that, about racism in the feminist movement. And I stared at her and I said, but that's what Audre Lorde was writing about. I mean, that's what Bell Hooks was writing about. I'm like, they were talking about racism in the feminist movement. And it made her very uncomfortable. And so she was trying to dismiss my ideas in a very subtle way. But then I pulled a Wendy Davis. I'm not sure you guys remember her, but she was the Democrat from Texas who last year in one of their court hearings when the Texas judicial system was going to try to ban like abortions, Wendy Davis went on like a 13-hour filibuster.
Cool.
Do you remember that?
Yeah,
I don't know
I
if you
do.
guys remember. She like wore a suit and then runners because she knew she was going to stand up
Right.
like for 13 hours. So I basically just pulled that on me, and I don't like to do that, but I did. And then finally my classmate said, okay, well, it seems like you've read a lot, and so we'll just go with your idea. And I went, well, we don't have to go with my idea. I just think that like we have to really understand what Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde and Angela Davis were really writing about, which is they were talking about racism in the feminist movement. Let's not
Yeah, if
hide
you're doing
that.
a presentation about that author.
Yeah, let's
Right.
just like, why are we trying to like cover that up?
It's fascinating too, like
Yeah.
because it's such a potent thing to think about and critique is the way that justice movements can have these injustices within them, and
Yeah.
and how to like counteract that. So, I mean, like I guess I can understand the perspective. I think I've been in that position before where I was letting some aspect of guilt inside of me like prevent me from engaging with material,
yeah.
because I shouldn't have to talk about race. I'm not racist, like,
Yeah.
and so it manifests the type of not talking about race that ends up creating racism.
Yeah.
Is a defense mechanism that pops up of the fear of being racist. So like not wanting to be racist turns into like a type of racism when you can't talk about certain issues just because of like, I guess, just being raised on this idea of like everything's already good, like civil rights is over, like it's a perfect society, like no more critiques are needed. And then they eventually get to this point where they hear like, oh, there's still really potent critiques about the society, and I'm kind of complicit in some of these systems, like don't talk to me,
It's hard. And so, you know, like I could see that she was uncomfortable, but I was like, what we're not going to talk about this.
Yeah, it's hard, but that's no reason to like coddle to that. Like you,
So my classmate, a few minutes later, she's quiet. She's on her phone. I'm talking to my other classmate about, you know, aspects of her presentation. And finally, my classmate goes, oh, you were right about bell hooks and what you said. I just Googled it. I'm like, you believe Google over me? Like, why did you okay, this is like insane. But it's true. The critique and trying to even just confront those things about yourself, it's scary.
I can't imagine having such a negative or doubtful reaction. Like, to me, Bell Hooks is one of like the most accessible feminist writers to talking about intersectionality. And even when I was still really green to all this stuff, I hadn't heard about it. Reading Bell Hooks' article, it just always made sense to me. Like, it's not negative or accusatory or anything like that. It's very, very accessible material. So it's just, I've noticed the same pattern in, often people will take opportunities to try to socially humiliate someone who's bared some aspect of their care for the world and their care for other people, or like it's seen as a vulnerability to care. And so then people put up these walls to like caring about, for example, like workers in China with bad work conditions. So they ironize it and they create like a bubble of not having to care about it. And if someone actually, it's like, hey, but like we could change that. Our voices have power and we can create movements that will affect the world. Then that's seen as a vulnerability that's like attacked. And the people who are attacking, I think, are the people who are least confident in themselves and feel like their voice is not worthwhile or can't contribute. I've just noticed the connection there between like you being not attacked but kind of like vaguely outgrouped for already knowing what you're talking about, and for expecting other people to keep up with you. I've seen the same thing a lot on like Facebook. It's like people will take a weird high ground position against caring or against participating or against knowing more or making the dialogue intelligent rather than banal. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a weird social psychology thing. I think it has to do with guilt and self-hate on the part of the attacker.
Yeah, and also just trying to like protect their own privilege. And I think like earlier we were talking about like Gamergate and gamer journalism and the whole Anita Sarkeesian issue. And I think you're totally on the spot in terms of even that issue.
I think there's something in Gamergate that I've got this idea about not conservatism like deep middle America conservatism. I think that's like a different beast. But when you're talking about like cities that are mainly kind of left-wing sentiment, like most cities are, the conservatives within those cities, I think they're less conservative and more contrarian. Like they want to disagree with left-wing people than they want to agree with right-wing people. Right. They're more like, I'm slightly annoyed by the way that feminists talk about feminism, so therefore I'm going to like use anonymity services to phone in bomb threats.
Right.
And that's proportionate because I feel slightly annoyed and I don't really want to understand it. I don't want to break it down. That contrarian position causes conflict continually. And I'm not saying that like left-wing people never cause unnecessary conflict or don't also suck in their own way. But
what are you talking about? No kidding.
But I've just noticed this strain of contrary, like it's always less about what you identify with and more about what you want to distance yourself from.
Can you give an example? Like
for example, on my Facebook, if I am posting about something that is really, really hard for a lot of people to grapple with, like colonialism.
Yeah.
Then there's always a chance that there's going to be someone that I went to elementary school with who feels the need to like chime in with an idea that's like, well, it's not so much that I disagree with you, but I just want to like shut down what you're saying somehow.
Yeah. And it comes out as kind of polite, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Or
if they're
if they have good tactics.
Yeah.
So they'll sneak in to annoy, like seeing that someone cares about something and seeing that as a vulnerability, and then poking this like contrary perspective. Not necessarily even because they believe it, but just like to undermine the point and try to like refute the argument. I'm too busy.
Yeah, it's like if someone's just shitting on something for the sake of shitting on something, it's different than being like, hey, I really thought about this and have an opinion about why the way you're going about this isn't the right way to do it, and there's a better way to make positive action and to move forward. But that's like this much, holding my fingers really close together, a tiny portion of blocking type comments.
Well, I think the people who are actually making action and doing something good are also like too busy to just like troll the internet and like find like, like they're busy, you know, actually doing stuff. And so, but yeah, there's that. And I do agree with your conversations in terms of the political ones where it's just on the issue of analysis and then not moving on to action. That kind of, I prefer the ones who have a game plan and say, here's what we're gonna do to like counter this.
Yeah, phronesis, the
applied wisdom.
Yeah, applied wisdom. That's a Greek word for applied wisdom. Phronesis.
Yeah, like how you take wisdom and apply it in action and do things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's. It's too bad a lot of institutions don't do that.
That type of conversation is completely muted and minimized and hidden in our cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Even among the most progressive movements and thinkers, and people are very, very hesitant to jump on like, and this is what we do now, and like this is what I think it would be beneficial for us to do.
Yeah, here's step one, and
take action.
Yeah, even the most progressive and good things very rarely have any type of consensus on what step one is.
Yeah, which I think is scary to take that step one. And I think people are scared that they're going to do it wrong. And it's like, well, if you're taking action to say, change the world, well, there's like a billion ways to do that. and like, if you don't actually do it, then you don't, like nothing's gonna get done, right? And so like I think in general in life it's better to start and like make mistakes and learn from your mistakes and keep going than to just be so scared that you never even try to do anything at all from the beginning. Which I think we could see that, like, so when we finally did do the Audre Lorde presentation, I guess the entire class got involved in the discussion, and I don't find this the most exciting conversation, but it was a whole conversation about like bell hooks and her attack on Beyonce, which is like...
That's provocative stuff. It's a good conversation.
It's a good conversation. It's provocative, but I felt like it was getting to the point where it's a bit exhausting already. But when I tried to really bring up the issue of how these feminists were, when they're from their writings, the thing that you should really take away is take action, build your movement, build your theory, and then move on. It was very hard for people to grasp that. And I don't know how many times I kept saying theory building over and over again. And I was saying that theory building is a form of action. Like you're actually conscious in terms of trying to change your thinking and trying to create a new way of thinking and analyzing the world. And I think that itself is something to be taken seriously. You should really applaud that, and how that's very important especially for oppressed and marginalized people to actually create their own theories.
And when you think in different ways, it changes how you act.
Yeah, and it was very hard for people to grasp that.
Yeah, like were people drawing a dichotomy between action and like discussion? They just couldn't even.
No, they just kept wanting to talk about Beyonce.
What's about Beyonce? So I felt horrible because as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, I really want to know more about this Beyonce thing. Like, what is it?
Can we role play the Beyonce? Like, do you want to play bell hooks and I'll play a Beyonce supporter, or vice versa? And we'll give like a.
We could, okay.
Just a gist of.
Just a gist to
You're like, this is the problem with the conversation we were having, is that it went to Beyonce, and now we're like, let's go to Beyonce.
let's just take a stop over in the cul-de-sac of Beyonce, because a lot of people probably aren't familiar with the
whole conversation.
And we can sum it up really quick.
Okay, so I'll be Belle.
You be Belle, and I'll be your supporter of Queen Bee.
Yeah. You're gonna be like the single lady over there.
I'll be the single lady.
Well, basically, Beyonce is probably not the best role model for women of color. And, if you aspire to be Beyonce, then you're not actually changing the status quo. You're not actually changing the system and bringing it down. You're just playing into the system of being a very safe hero. And in that way, it's quite dangerous and damaging. Therefore, Beyonce's a terrorist. That's what Bill Hicks said.
Well, I'm a big fan of Queen Bee's music, so I'm maybe a little biased. But I feel like Beyonce is a strong, independent woman. She's doing what she wants to sexualize herself and put herself on magazines to. And call herself a feminist actively and draw attention to the idea of feminism being destigmatized. And she wants to use her sexuality as a way to further that discussion. Then I think it's not up to me to tell Beyonce she can't do that, because she's free and independent. And it says something good about our culture that it's now marketable to be a feminist, even if Beyonce is a bad feminist and she doesn't understand theory or whatever, and she is trying to just sell records.
So yes, the conversation was almost like that, where we did try to.
I think those are the two sides, right?
Yeah.
It's like people are saying Beyonce is playing into this male power narrative of that you need to have money and be successful and show these masculine shows of strength in order to be powerful, and like taking her femininity back by bringing it into like this male capitalist space is destructive ultimately. And then other people saying Beyonce is free to do what she wants. You can't tell her not to.
And I think that for the whole Beyonce Bell Hooks argument is really what I think that Bell Hooks is also really trying to say, is that it shouldn't be about the individual saying I can do whatever I want, but it's like the collective interest of a marginalized group. And is somebody like Beyonce, is she really the best role model to tear down the very systems that's creating these oppressions and these inequalities? And so, the conversation went to Beyonce doing whatever she wants to do. And then all of a sudden talking about Nicki Minaj and like booty and like Anaconda. And I was just like, I can't even believe like this is what we're talking about. I was like, and then apparently like people getting butt implants. I'm like, no, I don't want to talk about this. So it was.
So moving on to butt implants on the show today.
So it was amusing at the same time. It was just really saying, well, these are conversations that's happening, but I think the point is let's look at the
let's
big
try to
picture.
have a higher level conversation in our university or college classroom here.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to like Black feminist theory, like it boils down to very superficial things, and it was amusing and also disappointing at the same time. And then I thought, well, this is it. Like, this is the level that we're at. But I do think that this is a reflection of our society. Like.
Well, I mean, all those articles that you sent us about, there was a teacher who was suspended for talking about structural racism, and three white male students were offended by this talk of structural racism. And
I hope someone stood up for their rights.
They did. They suspended the teacher.
She was reprimanded.
She reprimanded, right?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, I don't know if it was a suspension. I think it said reprimand. I don't know what that means.
So the case of Shannon Gibney in Minneapolis, it happened last year, and she's a Black American teacher, and she was teaching media studies, and she also teaches, English literature, and she was talking about structural racism in America, like nothing controversial. She wasn't attacking anybody. But yeah, 3 of her male students reported her and said that she made them feel uncomfortable and they didn't want to take her class and they felt really bad. And she was like, this isn't about you. This isn't.
Yeah, and it's not that you don't have a right to have your feelings hurt by imagining your complicity in a system. But if I put you on one side of the scale, like how offended you are and how much it sucks to hear about how racism benefits you, and then I put being on the other side of the scale, like being affected by racism in a negative way, like getting your feelings hurt kind of profoundly doesn't matter. And if anything, it's like...
Yeah. And it was insane because the college that she taught at, it's like 57% people of color, and so she was also very vocal saying like the college also had to change their policies and really have more of a progressive anti-racism program.
What was the actual thing that they reprimanded her for? Like, what did she do wrong technically according to the rules? Do you know?
This was also, I think, the 3rd time that she was in trouble. And the first time, she and a bunch of other professors from the college, all women of color, demanded that all faculty should go to an anti-racism workshop and, be more culturally sensitive. So that was I think that was already one thing against her. That was a few years ago. And then a couple of years ago, Shannon was also one of the professors who volunteered with the student newspaper. And she got in trouble in that incident because one of the student editors wanted to really make a point saying everybody needs to hand in their articles on time. And so to make that point, he hung a noose from the ceiling. And she said, no, you can't do that. She says, you cannot hang a noose in a classroom because that just is so symbolic of our past of hanging Black slaves. You can't do that. So she got in trouble for that because then the student complained against her. And she was just saying, there's Black people in this school. I think that half the population in the school is also really offended. So she got in trouble for that. And then for this time, she was reprimanded because 3 students complaining that makes it the college had to take that seriously.
Right.
And it was found out that she's okay. She was able to go back to teach again, but I think it didn't really inspire her to teach again. So she's taking a sabbatical now.
Well, it just seems so anti-academic and anti-intellectual. If they have a disagreement with what she's saying, bring a reasoned argument and have a discussion about it. To me, that's intellectualism is willingness to have talks about these things and to openly discuss them. Not, I'm going to get you in trouble for saying something I don't like. It's just fundamentally anti-education. The best version of education that I would support would be open to all these diverse views. And if they have a well-reasoned argument, they should be able to make whatever arguments they want. And their students shouldn't have to agree with them. It should be we're all adults and we're able to talk about these issues. And that's what, that's how you make progress. You talk about things and have discussions. And
yeah. She was a beloved professor. I mean, she was also one of the few teachers that could speak Spanish fluently. So she was quite popular with a lot of her students because she could communicate with them as well. So I think that she was somebody that did her job as an educator who could relate to many of her students. So, but yeah, I do think that it's quite interesting that here's a professor talking about structural and systemic racism, and here's an institution who reprimanded her for doing that. So it was quite interesting, actually, her case.
And then there was also the teacher who was reprimanded for his tweets.
Yeah, Saleta.
Yeah, when I was reading over his tweets, I could definitely see why people were having problems with them. They were very anti-Israel tweets, saying some pretty strongly worded things. I can't remember, but again, I'm just why can't there be a conversation about this? What is the tendency to be no, he can't say that, even on Twitter? That's wrong. We as the school say no, you can't talk about that. No, bad.
I think he was also criticizing like America's support for Israel.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was more what it was, as if he's not allowed to have those opinions, which I find distressing and like really it's maddening for an institution to fire one of their professors, a very popular
Is that what happened? He was fired?
He was fired for that. And I think that because he had also made other comments about universities playing into like the neoliberal agenda. So he was also attacking like institutions and stuff. So he's not necessarily against people from Israel, but the Israeli state and what they're doing to Palestine. And he did not hide that.
And I think one of the problems with Twitter as a form of communication for complex ideas is that you have 140 characters.
Yeah.
And anything you say in that medium is going to come across as abrupt and unnuanced and potentially problematic. Like, I could see how people could read some of his tweets that I was reading that I don't remember anymore and be like, oh, this guy is racist. He's anti-Semitic. I could totally see someone coming away with that if they just read the selection of the worst ones that these people were posting in their articles.
And I think that there's also the distinction where I don't think that like Steven Saleta was telling people to go after Jews. Do you know what I mean? Like he was being critical about the policies, which I think that's what inflamed people. But yeah, when you take something from like Twitter and then people use that as like their main source of anything, it just makes it even worse.
No.
It bums me out. There's all these great journalists. Like there's Jeremy Scahill, Glenn Greenwald, these amazing journalists that for some reason their preferred medium right now is Twitter, and they're getting information out by Twitter, where if they just posted like blog updates instead of 7 tweets, then I would be able to access it because it's all lost in their feed. Like there's so many good journalists that are caught up in this platform because it's addictive.
Yeah.
I'd like to get back to the neoliberal university agenda because it was brought up, like this idea of the neoliberal agenda and how it affects universities.
Yeah.
Well, from my understanding, the idea, the neoliberal paradigm is this paradigm of globalism and austerity and cutting budgets for public education and cutting budgets for universities and
raising tuition fees
and having an international marketplace for schools rather than schools that serve their immediate surroundings.
Yeah.
Is there more to it than that?
No, I think that you've covered most of the big things. I think that there's a lot more though, and there's like little things connected to it. But yeah, in terms of like the commercialization of education and the privatization of it, and just the skyrocketing tuition fees, which I just don't get. It's scary.
Well, it used to be that you could, after you graduate high school, or like while you're in high school, you can have a summer job, put some money aside, and then when you're done high school, you can just afford to pay for your own textbooks and tuition and go to school.
Yeah.
Like there was a time where that was possible.
That hasn't been possible in a very long time though. And it's like, if you're a student who doesn't work and you're just in school full time and you're just dependent on a student loan for like the semester, it's not even really enough to cover everything. It covers your basics, but you're pretty much scraping by.
Right, like you can pay for your school and your textbooks and then like kind of live.
You could, if you're smart about how you divvy up your student loan, you could cover rent for like 3 months, depending on how much your rent is, you know?
Right.
You could cover your rent for 3 months, but there's 4 months in the semester. So then you're like going to be evicted on your like the last month of this semester. And then there's also food, and then there's bills. You know, it's very hard to just live on a student loan. It really, really is. And so students are really forced to take a part-time job. But then again, like even just tuition fees itself, that's like such a game because you can't make too much money while you're in school and accessing a student loan, because then
I've been looking into student loans right now because I'm considering going to
school.
To school. If I had already went to school, I would have been able to say it faster. Because I would have learned things.
No.
No, but
you might actually slow down your thinking. You actually, like, I feel like you're going at 120 miles an hour right now, and you're thinking you're going to have to scale it back to like 20.
But yeah, in order to apply for a student loan and potentially get it, I'm gonna have to quit my full-time job.
They'll look into, they want to know how much money you've made 4 months before going to school, how much you've got saved up, and then how much money you've made while you were in school. So it is a game. It's like you can't make too much money, but then while you're in school and your student loan just isn't enough to cover, you know, you it's not like you want to work, but it's like you just have to out of sheer necessity. And then half of you is like going, but wait, this is going to affect me a few months from now when I apply for another student loan. So yeah, it's this big game. You can't really...
You like have to be supported by an outside source to live comfortably.
Or even just to get by in a very expensive city.
Work under the table or something.
I
don't know.
It's just challenging. So the tuition fees are just ridiculous, and articles are coming out saying that tuition fees are going to rise like 13% in the next 4 years. Like, that's horrifying.
Well, I was just reading that's happening at UBC soon.
Yeah.
They're raising residency rates, and they're raising tuition for foreign students.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be the last time this happens. It's just something that every couple of years, when they can get away with it, they're like, oh, another 10% up. And then when people criticize that and say, oh, education should be free, it's good to have an educated society. It's good to be surrounded by people who are capable of participating in complex discussions and democracy. They're like, well, schools can't run themselves. Money doesn't grow on trees. Where's the money going to come from?
Yeah.
It has to come from these prohibitively expensive tuition fees. It has to come from expensive textbooks, because otherwise how are we going to afford, this land is so expensive to keep, and it's these crazy misplaced priorities.
At the same time, there's so much corporate money getting poured into the schools. Like, even looking at UBC or even SFU and their downtown campuses, like how much money has been poured into that by like different corporations. Or even if you look in terms of how schools have also changed, their mandates and their vision, like how, for example, Emily Carr, I believe, like it's somebody told me who went to school in the 80s at Emily Carr, that it was geared really more towards like the fine arts. I think that it was a little bit more liberating. It was a space where you could really create. But because obviously the times have really changed, now it's been co-opted for students to really, if you want to be an artist, you have to get into design.
Mm-hmm. It's career-based.
It's very career-based now. So there's like less classes that's focused on critical thinking, and now just more classes that's going to make sure that you get a job. And so it is more technically based, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, you've taken out a lot of like the critical thinking classes.
I don't even see that as like a university thing. I mean, it should continue into university, but I mean, critical thinking, like you should start teaching kids that right away. Like here's a bad logical argument, and here's why it's bad, because one of these premises doesn't make sense. Like, just getting people to like start thinking in terms of, does this make sense, or can I just string these words together to make some argument and make it kind of sound good? Like,
that's why I love the House Hippo.
The what?
The House Hippo commercial.
I don't know that.
Oh, it's like from Canadian TV in the 90s. There's like a British announcer being like, oh, the North American house hippo is there's like this photoshopped digital tiny hippo inside a house. You never seen this?
I think I've seen that.
It was like, it's a staple of my childhood. I saw this all the time. It's like,
I remember that. I remember seeing a tiny hippo in something,
and he's like, "Oh, it makes its nest in your closet," and then at the end of the commercial of like this fake documentary, it pans out and it's on TV, and the second narrator comes in and is like, "That seemed really real, but you knew that it couldn't be true. It doesn't make any sense that would be real."
Right.
And it was just a commercial for critical thinking. So it's really awesome. I love. Sorry,
no, but
sounds awesome.
It's good because there isn't really that critical thinking. In fact, most professors, and this is what they do, is they keep reminding students, and I've had professors do this, is they keep reminding us about our careers and what careers that we should take, or what careers like we could get out of, like if we pursue anthropology or whatever. And I'm just like, wow, the way to start the semester, scare all of us into like just like taking out the sheer joy of even learning, is like, no, you're in here for your careers.
There has to be institutions that support learning for its own sake, and not just learning for the sake of end X, like whatever end X is, whatever the career is. Learning as an inherent good and critical thinking as an inherent good is a really important thing that shouldn't be lost in any society. That it's scary.
When I think about countries that don't charge for universities, and there are countries that don't do that. Like Germany now has decided to like make tuition free.
Yeah, for anyone, even if you're not a German.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm like, let's go to Germany. And so it was interesting because when that came out, there were all these other counter arguments. So like Forbes magazine, and of course it's Forbes, was like, oh, this isn't really going to save anything because Germany is expensive, period. So you could get like a free education, but you're going to have to pay for everything else. And it's like, yeah, we get that, but this is one step towards something better, you know?
Yeah, people will often use other terrible things that I would correct also to try to refute my arguments for what I'm trying to correct.
Yeah.
Saying like, tuition should be free. It's like, well, you're still going to have to pay for food and shelter.
Yeah.
So
well, I think
forget the whole thing.
I think they're saying food and shelter are going to cost more because they have to tax it to pay for the education. Like someone has to pay for it eventually.
Which is like, okay, yeah. But, you know, in one way it's okay, well, that's what taxes are for. And like, we'll see what that looks like in the future. But I don't know. Have you guys been to Cuba?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Like, okay, so I mean, Cuba's not a perfect country. Like, you know, like everyone's always saying it's this perfect, you know, socialist utopia. It's not. I've been there. It's great. It's fun, but it's not perfect. I think that there's a lot of things there that's changing that we'll see where it's headed towards. However, the one thing I could really say is, and I'm not saying all Cubans are like this, but there's something about a society that has free education, free healthcare. People are like really chill and like they look at the world a little bit differently. So when I went there, it blows their minds. Cubans are completely shocked that anybody would have to pay for education. Like for them, it's just one of the most alien things ever because they don't have to do that.
It makes sense that there would just be like this oh, I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah,
I don't have to worry about if I get cancer that it's going to, like in America, it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Or not, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sorry. Or like my education is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like just to not have that weight on your shoulders, I can see how that would just take a load off and everyone would just feel a little bit more calm.
They're like the students there that I saw, they weren't stressed out about tuition. Like they could focus more on their studies. Do you know what I mean? Like they didn't have to worry about that. And the parents don't have to worry about that. And yeah, the fact that they don't have to worry about healthcare. I mean, if you're like, I think about, you know, seniors in the States, and I'm just like, I would hate to like be an old person in the States right now where you can't access anything unless you're covered or you have somebody who could support you. But when you go to a country like Cuba where like you'll be taken care of, like it does make a society a little bit less like neurotic. And it's not to say that there aren't problems there, but those are two very big social problems that they don't have to worry about.
Yeah, I think people start behaving erratically or more cagey when they feel that their biosecurity is threatened. When it's not for sure that I'm going to get to keep drinking clean water and eating healthy food. So all of a sudden, there's more of like a confrontational zero-sum mentality. Some of us get to eat, some of us don't get to eat. So I really feel that it's important to have a society that covers the basics, which is shelter, food, water, healthcare, education. I think education is an inherent, like, I want to say an inherent right, but I feel like the dialogue on rights has been kind of corrupted in a way. Like people don't like to frame things in those terms anymore. Like it's kind of fallen out of vogue because it's not about individuals having an inherent right to something so much as it's about building a society that benefits everyone. It's based on community where you can have effective democracy and have educated populations.
I think one of the reasons why people don't want to use that word is we live in this world where people are like, well, if you want it, pay for it. Yeah. You know, like that's really where that mentality I think is really coming from. So like if you really want something, you're going to have to pay for it. It's like, no, I shouldn't have to pay for something that will benefit me as a human being, that will like help realize my potential and then help society.
Or maybe really, like $10.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really, like, I mean, there is that they're just like, no, you have to pay for it. But it's also coming from people just being like, I don't want to have to pay for it. I don't want to have to pay taxes for that. I don't.
It's so funny and silly though, because of the way that like the deficit, surplus, taxation and spending thing is set up. Taxing and spending aren't inherently correlated at any given time.
Yeah.
Like in the present, people in America and people in Canada are being taxed for old debts. Like, so we're still paying for this old outstanding like military debt or whatever else people spent money on. So the idea that like, oh, you're going to school for free starting now, oh, the next 3 generations of people are sure going to slowly have to pay for that, like as is inherent to our system, and all spending like there's and what is like progressive
people call that enslaving the unborn. Like that is that you are taking the unborn, you're taking money from the unborn and forcing them to work for your education now.
Oh wow!
But see, it's an interesting concept.
Yeah,
it's poetic.
It is,
but it's not enslaving.
And I could see how that works in our society. I could totally see how people would like go, totally, I don't want to enslave my kid or my grandkids.
Yeah, but it's interesting where that kind of argument comes up is not when we're talking about bombing Libya.
Yeah, exactly.
It comes up when we're talking about supporting the most vulnerable members of our society.
Yeah,
that's when we really tighten the belt.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. It's like, I don't think anybody got upset like when we're building like the athletes village, right?
Yeah.
Or putting a new roof in like BC Place. I mean, okay, fine, nobody wants to get rained on, but it's like, but you talk about okay, but you talk about like, oh, let's put some more money so we could pay teachers a better wage. And so, you know, they could actually help out their students. I was like, no, those teachers are just so greedy. They make so much money. I'm like, I don't think they make that much money.
And it's playing on this misconception that families and governments are the same thing, and families can't spend more money than they have, so therefore governments shouldn't spend more money than they have. But historically, governments have always spent more money than they have, and it's how governments have worked. I think if you like look at the data for standard of living and public debt, standard of living goes up the more that you spend, and debt, the graph doesn't show this, but debt is inherently meaningless and has nothing to do with like standard of living.
Well, I mean, the people that you're in debt to, they don't think it's meaningless. They want the
because
money.
they want their money.
Well, they get their money.
Yeah,
they get some of their money. I mean, like they're still owed. Like, what's the Canadian debt right now? Does anyone have any idea? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number.
Let's say it's $1 trillion. Somebody is owed $1 trillion.
We're at $1.2 trillion in debt.
I was so close.
Yeah,
I did
close.
it. I just pulled that out of the Akashic records.
I think it changes from year to year, but I remember reading that 15 cents on every tax dollar goes towards just paying interest on existing debt, which I'm not going to say that I've got the magic bullet to completely change the system and make that not inherent to it, but I feel like that is a horrific injustice. Like, we legally gave them the capacity to issue us money, and then we pay them 15 cents of every tax dollar for the right for us to borrow our money from them that we gave them the right to issue. Like, maybe there's a guy in a top hat somewhere who's like, oh, I really want my money, but I feel like he's not the hero of this story. Like,
thanks to our friends, remember?
Our friend the Monopoly Man.
Yeah.
So the influence of corporate money and big money on university institutions is creating a situation where it's more expensive to go to university than ever before, and the curriculum is less pointed in the direction of learning and increasing your capacity to participate openly, and increasingly more and more towards career-oriented goals.
Our school system was designed from the start to create factory workers.
Yeah.
Like that was the way our system is designed. Originated in Prussia, and it originated from people saying, okay, how do we create people who are smart enough to do the things in the factories but don't necessarily need to think much more outside of that.
Then for like universities, they are trying to really also create like the intellectuals and the so-called thinkers to really, you know, push forward more with this neoliberal thinking. They'll need people who are going to be supporting like the current system to write how awesome it is, right?
Right.
And I think that that's what I really see when I look at
it's a self-preservation thing.
Yeah, well, I see that with my classmates who, you know, think that, well, because I'm in school, they think that, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to be working in those like blue collar jobs. I'm going to be a writer or whatever. But what is like, what kind of philosophy are they also going to be like propagating as they write.
Sure,
You know, what kind of culture, what kind of books are they going to be producing? Is it going to be stuff that's really going to make people critical? On the issue of like the academic journals, some of them are really awesome, and then some of them are just like are written in a language that like nobody really gets, right? And like, I think that's also just one way of like isolating people too.
Well, yeah, and it prevents. I think apart from the fact that it's very exclusionary and elitist, and builds this idea of like an educated minority that's responsible to watch over the mindless sheep.
Yeah,
which is like a reoccurring paradigm in politics and academia. Is like the noble lie idea, and like this idea of some people need to be controlled and other people get access to the cheat codes. Yeah. Like the idea that we call our economic system neoclassical economics. Yeah. Which is like the most transparently jargonistic, like exclusionary, fuck you, don't talk about my department. Like you don't know shit, you don't know these words, so you're not welcome. Apart from that, which I think is a horrifying aspect of it, is it prevents interdisciplinary collaboration, where you have these radical dialects that are completely in opposition to each other, or will have different words for similar concepts. It prevents us from, as an intellectual community, from synthesizing ideas that actually have a lot in common, or it makes it a slower process to do so.
I mean, but like there is something just inherent to almost any grouping, or in any like you were talking about theory building earlier, like you begin to fall into your own jargon. Like there's feminist jargon, there's jargon in every like study of a thing, and if you want to be taken seriously in talking about those things, you have to go through and figure out what they're talking about and learn the words. And like it's useful, but it is also exclusionary. Like it keeps people out, and I think there has to be a balance, I guess, struck between like useful jargon that actually like really needed a new word, or things you're just doing the big word thing for to I was quoting from some academic journal in a blog post I was writing, and I just realized that I could remove 75% of the words from this paragraph and say the exact same thing with so much more clarity. And I was just like, okay, no, I'm going to change this, and just put a little asterisk, like I fixed this because they don't know how to write.
But yeah, it's true. I think that there isn't this like strong, holistic, like cohesive unity in the universities, in the different departments, because I think primarily it has a lot to do with the fact that there are funding issues. In fact, I was talking to a scientist once, and I asked her, why do you think certain areas in science get more funding than other fields? Like, for example, why are, math, chemistry, physics getting sometimes more funding than like biology? She just basically said, well, if you look in terms of the world, like, who's going to be creating new technologies and new engineering structures? It's not going to necessarily be the biologists. They will be giving money more towards like chemists and engineers than they would to biologists, which I think it's all related anyway. But yeah, there is that very strong competition, and also who can make more money the most, right? So, and the quickest.
Yeah.
I think I've just seen other people participate in this paradigm where they'll attack people who get into the liberal arts in university because of the decreased amount of employability versus like engineering, and then they'll get mad at people for being interested in interesting things and wanting to you went to school for philosophy, like, oh, I bet you get tons of jobs, like, haha, I'm great, I'm representing neoliberalism.
Whenever I see someone like with that kind of like fake, like I'm better than you, I always read into it like, oh, they wish they could have taken history and art, but they didn't. They took engineering because they wanted the job, and they're jealous and scared that maybe you're going to do something with that philosophy degree that they could have done,
and they
gave up some part of themselves to be an engineer. Like that's what I see when I see that.
And now their lives suck because they have this like great job that gives them a lot of money, but they're working like 24/7 and they have like
they
nothing.
hate it. They had no passion for it from the start. They just
yeah.
It's such a dick move to like get mad, like to be like, wow, you sure have a lot of debt. How are you gonna pay that off, philosopher? Why don't you think your way out of this one? But because what, like you're, because what you're doing in that critique is you're condoning the injustice of the system. You're condoning, you're condemning the victim for daring to care, for daring to want to learn, and for daring to not prioritize their learning based entirely on return on investment.
Yeah, well, I know exactly how you feel because, like, I'm pursuing art history. And every time people hear that, they're like, the two reactions I get is, oh, God, you're, like, so elitist. Like, you just want to study art. Or they're like, what the hell? You're just going to look at paintings the rest of your life? And it's like, no, it's not just that. And it's weird because, when I try to tell people, I'm like, art history encompasses not just looking at paintings. In fact, you have to understand history and philosophy and politics.
Like the culture that surrounded the creation of that art and what did it mean and what does it mean for us today? And I'm sure there's a lot of aspects to that.
Yeah, people do look at it mockingly and it's like, there's an importance to these fields, but
I mean, the ideal concept should be that you're learning what you're interested in. And I love the idea that I'm going to live in a world where some people are experts on art history, other people are engineers. There's room for both. And if I want to talk about art history, I'm going to talk to an art history expert. I want them to exist.
Yeah.
Like if everyone's just like, I want the most return on investment, I'm going to become an engineer, and we are completely a society of everyone was an engineer, I'm sure we'd have some crazy fucking bridges. But we need to have carriers of this information. Like we can't just have books. Like technically we still have books that explain about art history, but no one's looked at it in 200 years. That would cost too much money.
Yeah.
And you read things even from a few hundred years ago and you need to now interpret them in the light of the time when they were written. And like there is no just like saving information in a book and there it's done forever. Like if it's not actively being engaged with, the information is dead and it's no longer relevant, and you can just lose the context and lose nuance just by simply no longer engaging with the information, by not having a culture surrounding that.
Exactly. And I think that when you look in terms of like education being seen as an investment, like, be an engineer because that's what's going to, your investment is going to make sense because you'll be making money. But at the end, it's almost like education should also be something that you should just be able to access at any point of your life. It shouldn't be something that you do when you're young and then that's it. Like I feel like you should be able to go back to school at any time, at any stage of your life, just for the sake of learning.
Yeah. And thankfully, like it is becoming more that way, not university education directly, but university education via free online lectures, textbooks being leaked, people creating more interesting presentations than a textbook. Like there's a lot of people out there now talking at a layman's level about really complex, interesting topics in almost any field that you might be interested in. You can find a lot of content online to learn about that. And that's a really awesome, beautiful thing that's going on.
Yeah, it speaks volumes that Aaron and I haven't went to post-secondary, but we can have a conversation with you who has gone to post-secondary.
Well, I'm still post-secondary.
Well, I mean, like even that you've had access to these materials behind this paywall, but we can still have a conversation as equals because we're still part of the same cultural zeitgeist in a lot of ways because of the non-university education that we're all kind of getting from the internet.
And I'll be honest, and I am very honest about this, is like I went back to school just so I could get a piece of paper. Like that is what it is at the end of the day for me anyway. I mean, I don't see myself being an academic. I don't want to be. I've seen the institutions. It's not where I want to be. I think there's a lot of challenges there that I don't really want to focus on. I'd rather be focusing on challenges outside of universities and schools. In terms of internet learning, you guys have heard of like MOOC and Coursera and all of those. And I think that's great because you can access that material and it's for free. Some of them, what's interesting is like they're working with different universities now where you could pay a small fee. Like I think $10, you can get a little certificate after the 13-week course.
Cool.
And it's certified by like UBC has done that. I think it's done it for a couple of science courses. So there are those opportunities there. And I think it's really important.
That's really interesting. I had the idea at one point a few years ago that I was going to pick some subject, like when I decided what I really wanted to learn about, look at all the courses that I would need to take, but just do it all by myself and then just like self-proclaim that I have a PhD or a bachelor's in whatever this thing was. And like if they're like, what university? Be like, oh, I just did it myself, but I have it. I learned those things.
Yeah.
I'll talk to any person who knows these things and I will match them point for point.
I forged the PhD in my own house.
Yeah. I just thought that would be like a provocative, fun thing to do, to be like, oh no, I have a PhD in this. Oh, from where? Oh, from me. I made it. I did it online. Yeah.
And I think it's way more interesting. Like, I think that people think that the acquisition of knowledge and learning is just in a university setting, and it's totally not. Like, I don't think you could learn everything in university. I think that with the way the world is and how fast things move now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of universities are trying to also catch up to the changing world and also the changing like values. So it's quite interesting.
Kind of piggyback on that. I did want to just talk about the fuck safe spaces t-shirt incident thing.
At Carleton University. I was just astounded at that. Like, it had fuck safe spaces on the front and then on the back, or me or something like that. Like, especially because they said in the article, the first article I read, that there was many people, females and males included, in this group. And I just was instantly curious to be like, what do these people think? Like, do they not know that people are going to read that and be like, oh, I'm not against rape? Like, that's basically what people will read on that shirt. Yeah. And that's what a lot of these articles were talking about. Hey, these people are declaring that they're not for safe spaces. They want people to feel unsafe around them. Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that someone would wear a shirt that says, I'm in favor of rape. Yeah. And so I became obsessed with trying to figure out what they thought. Like, what was their story behind this? Like, why did they make these t-shirts? And I could only found one article because nobody wanted to make a statement about it. But someone anonymously who said he would never have worn the shirt made a statement saying that the people who did make the shirts were against a policy the school had for, I guess, during the first week. They have some safe space policy that includes not saying certain things, that included even just like swear words. And that the reason it said fuck safe spaces is because like they were defining safe spaces as like, oh, this coddling of new students where you can't even swear around them, and we think that that's wrong. And I was like, okay, there's first of all, a lot better ways to make that point. But just, I don't know, like I reacted against this sort of idea that people would put on a shirt that says rape is good. Like I was like, there has to be something else to this story, because I think it has to be a knowledge gap that they don't understand how that was going to come across. Yeah, because it's like they could have figured that out on their own if they thought about it a little bit. Yeah, it's not like, oh, poor them, they're being misunderstood. Like, they engineered their own misunderstanding. I think that it was also just like, you know, just a reaction in terms of like the sexual violence that a lot of women have experienced in university spaces. And I think that it's a reaction to that. I think that a lot of like men will have to be accountable for their actions. And I think that a lot of these guys don't want to be, like, they want to think about it.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, it's the same thing we were saying before about the 3 white guys in the class. That like it makes them uncomfortable to think about how they might be participating in something negative, and like wearing that shirt, it's just I don't know, if you're gonna, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like, if you're gonna put on a t-shirt like loudly proclaiming fuck safe spaces, you should understand what the term safe spaces means to people, and that it's not just this policy of not swearing for the first week. It's a term that has a history in the feminist movement about like safe spaces and rape culture. And I became like fascinated by this idea that someone could accidentally put on a shirt that says I support rape
Yeah.
and not know it, because I can't believe like there was a large group of like 30 or more people that all understood what that shirt meant and were wearing it and being like, yeah, I think there had to be some like base ignorance going on
I
there.
think that was just, I think that's like from what we've been talking about, like that is a total example of like just ignorance and just, did these students not know what the hell is going on around the world in terms of sexual violence and rape culture? It's like, I think that maybe one or two people did, like wore these shirts and people were like, yeah, cool, we'll just wear all the shirts too. Like, that looks fun. And then didn't even think about it.
There had to have been a lot of not thinking going on. If someone's like, hey, we made these shirts against that stupid no swearing policy, and all these people are like, oh yeah, I hate that. That's dumb. Why can't we swear for the first week? Okay, I'll put on this shirt.
Yeah.
Maybe, like, I don't know. Like, I just wanted to see what they had to say about it, and that's the only thing I could find.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Gamergate thing.
Yeah.
Where if you look, you're trying to like, what is your point? Like, what is the gamer side of Gamergate? It's like I'm trying to dig on the internet to what is your point? Like, what is the fundamental misunderstanding that's happened where you think that it is okay or permissible that the critiques of the video game industry are somehow worthy of anonymous death threats, or like maybe there's people in Gamergate who like, oh well, I condemn the death threats, I condemn the bombing, but gaming journalism is important.
What I will say is what I have saw is people like taking her videos and making arguments against her arguments and not insulting her and not doing anything. Like there are people doing that in a respectful way.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I think
the culture at large, I don't think is that.
I think that I agree with you. I think that with Anita Sarkeesian and her feminist frequency, I think that like, yeah, you can make a very intelligent critique, but I think Gamergate and Anita Sarkeesian, it was really like threatening her.
Well, anytime there's like a prominent female figure, they will tell you they get a lot of death threats and rape threats and just like really like horrific shit hurled at them like all the time.
And it has really nothing even to do with what she's critiquing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, like, what are you really upset about? Like, what is it? Like
that Mario always saves the princess, and she's just pointing that out, just pointing out that it's always Mario saving the princess.
It's always a male. It's almost always a male agent and a female subject. It's not an attack on you, and it's not an attack on video games that you find fun.
And it's not saying that like if you ever played Mario, you're a bad person.
Yeah,
like, I played Mario. It's okay.
But I think that, you know, she is talking about like sexism in like the gaming community, which is, you can't deny that. Like she's not a stupid person. She's quite intelligent. So she was making like these intelligent critiques, and all of a sudden it's like you have people threatening to like, you know, blow up a school if she speaks there. So unfortunately she had to cancel her talk, which I find really crazy, because here's this one woman talking about a very current, very relevant issue, and then she can't even talk about it in a university setting where you're supposed to be having like these intelligent conversations.
The idea that game journalism, which I see coming up on Twitter a lot in the Gamergate arguments, one side's like, you're being misogynistic. The other person's like, no, this is about the sanctity and importance of game journalism, which is that like reviews have to be accurate. They need to tell me how good the game is. And
but I just don't understand how like what her critiquing the games affects any other game journalist. Like, isn't she actually doing game journalism in a sense? Like she's reviewing it from a feminist perspective of this, but it's like,
or maybe it's like, oh, this new game is so fun, but they don't like it because it's sexist, and they gave it a F, but it's totally at least a B+ game. Like, it's fun to play.
Like movie journalism, there's a real problem in that there's all these movie reviewers out there who don't agree with me, and like I see movies getting bad reviews that were good, and movies getting good reviews that were bad, and like this is a huge issue.
I'm calling it a bomb threat.
Movie journalism is in the toilet right now. They don't agree with me.
But especially when the fourth estate, when you're talking about journalism that matters, like holding power accountable, when that's constantly under attack right now, where Julian Assange has been in the Ecuadorian consulate for years. Bradley Manning has been locked, or Chelsea Manning rather, has been locked up for years since leaking documents to journalistic sources. Edward Snowden has to hide in Russia. Journalism is under attack. Journalism needs to be protected. Journalism is important and matters and affects the future. Without journalism, we're all kind of fucked.
Yeah.
Game journalism, I don't give a shit about. Like, there's never been a game review so inaccurate that it caused tyranny on Earth. You know?
It's just like whatever she says, like she can't affect what other game journalists say.
And if anything, somebody like Anita Sarkeesian could actually just like elevate the kind of conversations in game journalism,
Adding more perspectives to it.
and bring it to a higher, more sophisticated discussion, which I think obviously needs to be done.
Yeah.
Considering that it's crazy, but yeah, it's true. Journalism does need to be protected, and I have friends who are in journalism who have uncovered these incredible stories that could really expose like mining companies, but then they won't. And I get frustrated. I'm like, why won't you write it? You have all this material, and they're like scared for their careers, and they're like, I'm gonna get fired. And I work for a small like publishing company, and it's
Oh, that's horrible.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
Like those are the stories that should not get you fired. Those are the stories that should get you like promoted.
Yeah.
Well, it's backwards
the
incentives.
Same neoliberal corruption of economic influence on essential institutions.
Yeah.
Where here in Vancouver are two competing newspapers, the Province and
The Sun.
The Sun. I haven't read them in a long time, but they're in the same building. They're owned by the same company, and they share the same archives. Like in our city, definitively, the Coke and Pepsi of newspapers are coming from the same plant. So it's happening like because of the economic crisis and the rise of digital journalism.
Yeah.
More people are getting their information online, and the newspaper and magazine industry is not as profitable anymore. And because of that, they're more reliant on things like advertorials, where someone will pay for something that appears to be an article, but in reality is an advertisement, or appears to be an opinion piece. It's framed as, I'm a staunch rebel opinion column, drink Coke. Like my position is Coke is great. And that's what we fought for in this free society.
And I
don't remember the last time I read a newspaper. I look at the covers at work.
Yeah.
But I don't read them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just kind of like, maybe it's just a religious belief or something. But like, I feel like if we had strong journalism and we had strong public education, like I think of democracy, education, and journalism being kind of like, how in engineering, triangles are the strongest shape. And I think that journalism, public education, and democracy all lean on each other to build a more strong system, because you have engaged members of society who know what they're talking about.
On the positive side, I think that shit's all falling apart. Those newspapers, like nobody in our generation takes them that seriously anymore, or at least doesn't take them more seriously than online sources.
Yeah.
Same thing for education. It is becoming more free, not in the institutional sense, but in the online sense. And I think that all of the things that we're saying we should move towards are happening already. These structures are being built, and the old structures are either going to have to catch up, or they're going to end up
or they just
dissolving.
have to fall apart.
Yeah.
And just like get like something.
They'll
like,
just be replaced.
Just even what we're doing, I think like just people taking things on and blogging and podcasting and all of that, which I think is fantastic. And, I would encourage everybody to do that, especially if that would be something that would interest you. Like, I think it's just better. And I think it's already like happening. I think people are trying to find information too that's beyond like the institutions that's out there. Like
on the subject of monetary incentives and careers within university context, there's this really awesome idea that, it would ideally be a quote, but I don't have it on hand, so I'm going to paraphrase it, that Richard Rorty said about university that I found really kind of illuminating and awesome, where he said that the sciences can always embarrass the humanities and the arts by saying, what have you done for human knowledge? But that people don't realize that the arts and humanities can also embarrass the sciences by asking, what have you ever done for human freedom? Because philosophy and art are how we express our non-freedoms.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's the is-ought thing. Science focuses on like what is, and like studying and looking at what's actually there in reality. And philosophy deals a lot with how things should be, or how we should act, or not just philosophy, but like the humanities in general. Like fiction is a way of talking about philosophy. It's a way of presenting ideas. It's a way of making arguments, in a sense, in its best forms. There's so much richness to human culture that has nothing to do with like figuring out exactly how specific things work. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's awesome. But yeah, I don't know. I really agree with that quote. I really like that quote.
I think that one scientist, though, that does advocate for both is Dr. Crystal Dilworth, and she always said that art needs the structure that science can provide, and then art can also free science from its very narrow concepts sometimes. So she comes from both sides because she's a neuroscientist who studies like the electrochemical reactions in the brain, and she's also a classically trained ballerina. So
Neat.
So she definitely sees both, and I think that she's a big advocate for saying that like you can't actually separate the two. But yeah, she's always saying that like no, you need both, and I think that like she's an example of somebody who exemplifies both the arts and the sciences, because she's very good in her field, and at the same time she loves the arts. Like, and I think like even somebody like Albert Einstein was a big advocate for the arts. I mean, he really loved it.
He made a lot of just sort of like poetic statements. And he was, the idea of science that he had is very different from, I think, what a lot of science advocates today think of as science in a more narrow sense. Yeah. Or like, I really like his thing, like either everything is a miracle or nothing is a miracle. Yeah. And I feel like the modern science, a lot of that is based on like nothing is a miracle, but I think everything is a miracle.
Or I think like even Neil deGrasse Tyson, he loves
he's awesome.
He's awesome, and he also loves the arts. I mean,
But he did. I was going to talk about this before. I'm glad this came up because he publicly said on a podcast or something like that he thought there was no more applications left for philosophy. And
he has fallen into that Lawrence Krauss like this anti-philosophy science thing, and I'm just like, you can't do science without philosophy. Science is based on a philosophy. And like if you're using logical inference from your data to make conclusions, guess what? Logic is part of philosophy. Empiricism is part of philosophy. I hate that argument so much.
It's hard to separate that. Like I think that it's hard. You can't separate the two because everything has a philosophical outlook anyway.
What you're accepting is evidence, like epistemology, and what you think your underlying assumptions for how one should collect knowledge. It's all a philosophical game that you're participating in from the get.
So it's weird that
I think there's this idea among some people, and maybe he partly subscribes to this, that all those important things have been figured out. Like we figured out epistemology, we figured out what counts as evidence and what doesn't. Like all those logical things have just like, we're done with that. Like no more discussion needed. And I think that's a really dangerous like perspective to take.
Yeah, like what do you think he means by like we figured out things like in terms of evidence?
What I mean is they think science can now operate free from philosophy, and the only way I can interpret that is meaning that we need to have no more discussions about how science operates. We got that shit down pat, figured out. It's all done.
Well, I think it comes from this misconception or this idea that the branch of philosophy that's just like a nihilistic sophistry, where you're like, well, how do you really know that that water's made up of hydrogen and oxygen? Like, how do you personally know that? Like, really know that? And it's not some sort of amazing illusion. But that's not really philosophy. That's like a specific, the fundamental doubt philosophy is just like, it's a very, very narrow band of extremely annoying philosophy that
it's like purist skepticism.
How
do I know that even the words you're saying are the same words that I'm hearing?
And I have a great example for that. And it was, again, in my English class, when we were talking about like existentialism and ignorance and responsibility, like all these topics were coming out, and this one young woman in my class, she took her first philosophy class like last semester, and now she thinks she knows everything, which it's like kind of adorable in one way, but really annoying because it's like, no, you don't know everything. So we were talking about, again, existentialism and action and meaning and what does it mean and do our actions affect other people? And she kept bringing up the question because she couldn't let it go. And I don't know if she was just trying to sound really edgy and provocative, but she kept saying, well, I'm straight, but I'm for gay rights. But if I go out with a guy, does that mean that I hate gay people? And I just like looked at her, I'm like, no, it just means you're straight. I mean, you don't have to think about it. Like
if you want to support gay people, you have to be in a gay relationship.
Yeah, and I just stared at her, and then she kept bringing that up, and I was like, this is going nowhere.
That's like what the conservatives in like America fear most.
Yeah.
That like that everyone is going to be forced into like a gay marriage.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna.
It's also what U.S. conservatives kind of allege about gay marriage is that gay people by existing are hating straight people. That by having a gay relationship is an attack on straight relationships that have nothing to do with the people in question.
Yeah. Well, when conversations like that happen, like when she came up with that, I was like, no, it has nothing to do with you hating gay people. It's not even about that. It just means like you're straight and like that's obviously that's your orientation. So like, why do you think you hate gay people? I'm like, what is wrong with you?
Especially when you were just like, and I support gay rights, but like, do I hate gay?
Do I not support gay rights?
Yeah, like, I don't understand. But she kept sticking to that. And of course, everybody jumped on that and was like, yeah, that's so true. Like, you know, like I love China and I don't want it to be destroyed. But like, if I buy stuff from China, does that mean I'm like, oh my God, like, let's not even go there. Like don't start. It was such a narrow and very individualistic way of looking at the world and your relationship to the world and how you could like advocate for a better world. I was like, this is so messed up. I can't. This is just crazy.
Yeah, it's like if I opt out of conflict minds and I don't have a cell phone and I don't have a laptop, it's going to fundamentally prevent me from being able to participate in discussions or get out the ideas associated with why this shouldn't be done. Yeah. So people are very eager to call hypocrite on idealists when you're dealing about what it's the is-ought distinction, because what is bad in a lot of ways, and you have to participate in it sometimes in order to not just keep up socially for appearances, but to like keep up with society and to like get the information that other people are getting. Yeah. And it's not hypocrisy. It's not a contradiction to oppose labor that is
an exploitative?
Exploitative, yeah. It's not a contradiction to oppose exploitative labor and then also have things in your possession which probably were a product of it.
Oh, yeah. I think majority of our things here in North America are going to be made in...
Yeah. Like everyone in North America owns things that
were made here.
And we don't get an option. You don't get an option to opt out.
Yeah.
There's no way to fully opt out. I mean, like some people claim to like getting off the grid or something like that. But that's when you opt out of society to such an extreme level at that, you're forfeiting your capacity to change the course or steer the ship.
And to participate. Yeah, it's really, I agree with you, to advocate change. You actually have to be in that society, and you know, or as my mother always said, like if you're going to try to tear down the system, you still have to learn how to live in it. So, and I think that's a very crucial point. And it's in an ideal world, it would be fantastic to have items that weren't from exploitative labor, but you know, we have to be realistic and try to destroy that too.
And we shouldn't attack these problems at the individual consumer human level. Like we shouldn't be turning on each other because the system is hurting us all and putting us in these situations where we have to compromise our moral ideals in order to be part of society. It's the same as blaming the art student for the fact that they have debt. Because they dared to learn about philosophy in a society that tells them they have to learn about something that can be flipped into profit immediately.
Or that they're seen as lazy because they can't turn their degree into something profitable. Like I really hate that, because it's like I don't think that anybody who would pursue their passion would be lazy. You know,
being passionate about something is just like the opposite of being lazy.
You know, it's like they would see that as like, oh, well, I guess like if you take the arts, you're not seeing as useful because somehow you don't contribute to society.
Your contribution is less obvious and it's less.
Well, it's not made on money, right?
I was going to say it's not rewarded monetarily as readily, and then like it gets conflated with not existing.
I was thinking maybe we could wrap up on some suggestions of what direction education should head. Like, what's the takeaway from this discussion? Is that, for me, the point I'd like to make is that money influencing democracy, influencing journalism, and influencing education, there's a similar pattern of degradation in these three essential institutions that hold each other up that is dangerous, and that needs to be opposed. And so maybe there's some complex logistics going into how do we fix these systems and maintain stability in our society while at the same time extending their usefulness to their ideal level. But we need to figure out how to attack that problem. So I don't have a solution, but I think that's the problem, right? I'm interested. I mean, like, there's other, what else? What can we do?
Well, I guess, like, just for my incentive is just to, get organized and to just really be critical about our institutions. But I don't think that we could do it alone. I think there needs to be like movements and there are student movements, but I think, maybe for another podcast is to like in terms of like why are certain student movements so temporary. But I do think that there are, like, as awful as our systems are, there are people who really are trying to do something different. Like, I think even just sitting here doing this podcast is action. I mean, It's small, but I think it contributes to something. I think it's creating a new culture, which I don't think people really have this understanding of the importance of changing and shaping culture.
Yeah, I almost feel like there's this avalanche going on of a shift away from and a noticing of these things that you're talking about and a shift away from these things that you're talking about that I don't know if this is a really unproductive thing to say. Like, I almost feel like I can just sit back and watch it happen and talk about it, and I don't really have to do anything.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up earlier because you were saying, like, I feel like we're headed in that direction anyways. And I was going to be like, yeah, that's true. But you also, like, really have to do things. Like,
well, like, I do this. I'm sometimes... No, I don't know.
You're not under attack.
I generally promote having a higher quality of conversation with people, and I think that it gives people the opportunity to rise to the level of that conversation and to learn about things. And I think just by having higher quality conversations with people, you are encouraging a more intellectual attitude and a more engaged person in education and in information, and that's important. And
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think that one thing that I agree with everything that you just said. I think just like doing things too and just creating things on your own and with other people. I think that's just important. I think was it Toni Morrison? One writer, I think it was Toni Morrison, who said, if you wait for a book, or she said something like, why wait for a book that you want to read to be written when you could just write it yourself? Just like do it. Like, and I think that those who are trying to really create new things, I'm just really more into action, like, yes, I love analyzing and I think it's great to understand and just like see what the problems are in our society. But I get tired because it just seems so defeatist. But then when you start going, here's what we can do though, and we'll create this, I think it's just so much more exciting.
I love how we can turn analyzing into an action by recording it and putting it on the internet. It's cool.
Yeah, so if you're listening at home right now and you have a silver bullet to the problems of the influence of money in education, money in journalism, and money in democracy, shoot it our way on our contact form. Let us know your utopian vision of the future. Actually, every week you should be emailing us with your utopian vision of the future. That's what we like to read.
With minutiae, my updates of all the different minutiae that have changed since last week. Like, we want a book report every week, please. I'm sorry.
And thanks a lot for coming on the show, Charlene. Where can people find you on the internet and listen to your podcast?
You could listen to my podcast, Misrepresent, Behind a Face of Fierce Woman, at charlenesayo.com. So that's CharleneSayo.com.
Sweet.
Cool. And we'll put links to that in the thing. People will go there.
This is fun.
Hooray!
Yay!
That's like the ending now. We're like, hooray.
I am wrong, you are wrong, seriously wrong. They are wrong, we are wrong, seriously wrong.
How did we get hung up this way? Because it's a social condition, to a degree.
How did we get hung up this way? How did man get into this kind of cultural
this incredible assumption that society is as it is and has always been this way.
Man has come out of the jungle where there wasn't enough, and where he fought for it, and he built a whole ethic around not having enough. And now to be able to really shift that ethic is a very, the whole motivational pattern connected with it is a very difficult thing for us to do.
What's this do to the free enterprise market system?